All right, let's dive right into today's explainer and explore the absolute micro-epic biological journey of the silkworm. We're looking at a creature that has literally shaped human history, global trade, and the concept of luxury, yet, crazy enough, it begins its life as something roughly the size of a typo. So we're going to break down the incredible science and just the sheer biological willpower of this remarkable little insect. Now, think about this for a second. We really need to bridge the gap between those luxurious silk ties, scarves, or sheets you might have at home and their highly unexpected origin, an egg the size of a mere ink dot. It's totally counterintuitive, right? The idea that one of the world's most sought-after, durable, and beautiful textiles comes directly from the mouth of a caterpillar. Like, how does this tiny bug manage to manufacture such a premium, high-strength material? Well, as you'll see, the answer lies in an absolute masterclass of biological engineering. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down chronologically today. First, we'll meet the silk maker itself. Second, we'll go from egg to hungry larva. Third, spinning the silk fortress. Fourth, we'll look at the metamorphosis and the moth. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with the full 60-day cycle. Let's jump into part one. Meet the silk maker, the Bombyx mori. So this insect's life is entirely defined by complete metamorphosis. That means it goes through 4 entirely distinct stages: egg, larva, pupa, and adult. And man, is it incredibly picky. To get that premium silk we all know and love, the Bombyx mori thrives exclusively on mulberry leaves. While its wild cousins are out there adapting to oak, pine, or castor leaves to make different types of wild silk, for our main character, the mulberry tree is absolutely non-negotiable. Moving right along to section 2, from egg to hungry larva. We are talking relentless consumption here. To really appreciate the dramatic momentum of this insect, you have to look at the ticking clock of its life stages. It's a massive rush. A tiny egg sits dormant all through the winter. Then spring arrives, and boom, you get a 27-day larval growth phase, followed by a remarkably fast 3 to 6 day spinning phase, and finally a 15 to 21-day pupal metamorphosis. The clock is constantly ticking for this little creature. Watch how systematically this larva transforms. Hatching at just 1/8 of an inch and covered in fuzz, it literally has one job: eat. It just consumes mulberry leaves day and night, growing so insanely fast that it bursts right out of its own skin. It actually goes through 5 distinct growth stages. Those are called instars, and it molts 4 times. During that very first molt, it sheds its initial hair to develop a much softer, smoother skin. By the end of this massive 27-day binge, the silkworm is huge compared to where it started. And at that exact moment, an internal switch flips. It stops feeding completely and desperately starts searching for a branch or surface to spin on.
All right, section 3, spinning the silk fortress. This is where we see some master biological engineering.
So using 2 heavily modified salivary glands, it extrudes this liquid protein, perfectly balancing 2 key elements. First, you've got fibroin. This forms the structural core of the filament. Think of fibroin as the steel rebar in a building, you know? It provides the incredible tensile strength that silk is so famous for. Then there's sericin, which acts as a binding gum. You can think of sericin as the concrete coating that rebar, holding the whole structure tightly together. As this liquid mix hits the air, it instantly solidifies into a superfine, incredibly tough filament. And here's a really beautiful detail. That picky diet we talked about earlier, it directly influences the final output, giving the silk its natural white or golden yellow hue. Since Bombyx mori exclusively eats mulberry leaves, even slight variations in the specific type of mulberry or the environmental conditions will dictate if the resulting cocoon is a pristine, snowy white or this rich, vibrant golden yellow. The insect literally builds a house colored by its food. And get this, it takes an astonishingly fast 3 to 6 days for the insect to extrude these fine filaments and completely encase itself. Just let that sink in for a second. In under a week, moving its head in continuous figure-8 patterns, it produces a single, unbroken thread that can literally be hundreds of meters long, weaving this perfect, impenetrable fortress. Which brings us to section 4, metamorphosis and the moth, the final act. Safe from predators and the outside world, the pupa spends up to 3 weeks completely rewiring its biology to become an adult moth. It's essentially dissolving its old caterpillar body and utilizing all that stored energy to generate wings, new legs, and an entirely new respiratory and reproductive system. It is without a doubt one of nature's most extreme makeovers, taking anywhere from 15 to 21 days hidden away in the dark of the cocoon. But the moth's final days are incredibly fast-paced and honestly kind of tragic. Once it's fully formed, it actually has a major problem. It's trapped inside its own super strong fortress. So it secretes a specialized enzyme from its mouth. This enzyme specifically targets and dissolves the sericin, that binding gum we mentioned, softening the silk just enough for the moth to break entirely through the cocoon. It emerges into the world, but its time is incredibly short. The adult moth lives for only a few fleeting days. In fact, it doesn't even have functional mouthparts to eat. Its sole biological imperative now is just to find a mate to ensure reproduction. Once they mate, the female lays hundreds of those tiny ink dot-sized eggs, and then, her mission complete, she dies. Finally, Section 5, the 60-day cycle. The loop closes. In just 55 to 60 days, the Bombyx mori executes a perfect, relentless cycle. We see the bulk of its life, about 27 days, dedicated to constant consumption in the larval stage. Then there's a slim but absolutely crucial 6-day window of pure biological engineering to form the cocoon. This is followed by the 21-day pupal stage of complete internal transformation. And finally, the brief 6-day adult moth stage, dedicated entirely to reproduction. In basically 2 months, an entire generation rises, builds, transforms, creates the next generation, and fades away. So every time you encounter silk from now on, whether it's a tie, a dress, or a decorative pillow, I want you to remember the hungry caterpillar and the 60 days of masterful biological engineering that made it possible. It begs a pretty fascinating question. If a tiny insect can manufacture a material stronger than steel and softer than clouds in just 6 days using nothing but chewed up leaves, what other incredible engineering secrets is nature still hiding from us? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. I'll see you next time.